Right. Good afternoon and welcome back to HR Tech Fest Connect 2020 and this afternoon's session on integrated talent experience platforms brought to you by Androgogic and Totara. Now, I'm Sean from HRM Asia and I'll be your host for the session. Now, before we begin, we have a short explainer video introducing the key webinar features.
Hi, welcome to today's webinar. Before we begin, I'll be orientating you around this webinar interface so that we'll all understand how to navigate the features. At the left section of the screen, you'll see the speakers, videos, and PowerPoint slides. At the right section, you'll see the tabs for chat, Q&A, polls, and handouts. At the chat box, under public chat, you can view all announcements from the host. Under private chat, if you encounter any issues regarding seeing the presentation and hearing the speaker, do inform the host via private chat. Under the Q&A section, you can post your question to the speaker throughout the session and it will be moderated for publishing. You may upvote the questions and the questions with the most votes will be answered. Should there be loads of questions that cannot be answered in the last 10 minutes of the session, our speaker will go through them after the session and provide a written response. We will share the response via email after the event ends. At the poll section, you can see poll results immediately after the host polls a poll for everyone to answer. Finally, the handouts section will be where offers and handouts are made available for you to access and download at the end of the session. After the webinar has ended, if you'll be going to another webinar from here, simply close the browser tab that contains this session and head on to the schedule page at hrtechfestconnect.com/live to access the link to the next webinar. Alternatively, wait for the host to end the session and you'll be redirected to the schedule page for the link to access the next session after 10 seconds. That's all for the interactive features for this webinar platform. Sit back and enjoy the session.
Hello and welcome to this session on talent experience platforms. My name is Lars Hyland. I'm the Chief Learning Officer at Totara Learning. We're a global learning technology company, and I'm joined with one of our leading partners, Androgogic, Alexander Roche. We'll be spending the next half an hour just giving you a flavor, I think, of how important it is to think a little differently about how we support learning, performance, and engagement in the workplace. There are some major changes ahead. I think you may have heard similar things in terms of the future trends earlier in the day of this event, and I'm very keen to explore with you how you can make that practical and real for you in your own organizations going forward. So just a little bit more. Alexander Roche is with Androgogic, and he represents one of our partners, top seller in the Asia Pacific region. We're very delighted to have him on this session, with Totara, we have a global reach actually around the world with 1,800 organizations using our Totara platform in various ways. And we'll be hearing from Alexander about a particular example in due course. What we will be covering in this session is why people matter in organizations. Well, I think we all understand that when we have an organization around the world, in any world, strategy is really critical to that. People lie at the center of that, and if we fail to support them effectively in doing those jobs well, and fail to address what really motivates them at work, then we will really have a lot of challenges, I think, facing us in being able to be successful. So we're going to have a look at what motivates us at work and really drives the experience at work, and also the tools and technologies that really are required to help support people and to help you as leaders and supporters of getting the best out of your people. How do you do that effectively? We're going to look at at how an integrated ecosystem is really quite critical to that future, and that open technology, a technology that is flexible and open and allows you to really focus on innovating at the rate and pace that really the wider world is demanding of us now. So during this session, we do invite you to think carefully about some questions. We'll be delighted to answer those towards the end of the session. So please do feel free to use the Q&A session area as we indicated in the earlier video. Okay, so why do people matter? It seems like a fairly basic question, but clearly, in the workplace, we see lots of challenges around the motivation levels and the productivity levels and performance that we see with people. And some of that is really driven by how our organizations are structured, and also how the tools and the workflows that are available to us support us or fail to support us. Now, going forward, I think we can all appreciate that the modern workplace or modern work is being transformed, and right now we're all sitting. Most of us, I think probably exclusively all of us, will be sitting in our home, actually working from home. There are many others who will be really challenged in actually performing their jobs and roles. So we're in the midst of a big systemic change, and it's very unlikely that we'll be returning to what we had before in any full sense. So what we are seeing is that pretty much all work, does involve technology. It's tech driven. The nature of our work and the job roles that we're being asked to occupy are increasingly complex in terms of the challenges and problems that we're trying to solve, the tools that perhaps we're being asked to use, the skills that we need to develop, and that we need to interact with each other and collaborate in much deeper ways. It's much more interdependent. And I think we've heard a lot over the past, I guess, few years, but we're really seeing a dawn of an age where job roles are being transformed by automation. That is redefining how work is done. And it's leading to what will be a large-scale reskilling of the workforce as we move into different roles. Now, not everybody will be able to make that transition. That's, I guess, a reality. But we need to be able to support as many of our people as possible to develop those new skills more effectively and to manage their motivation as these transitions occur. And in terms of learning, the learning world itself, learning technology has really driven quite a considerable shift here. And traditionally, I think we're seeing learning, e-learning and learning content and the platforms that drive or support that, shifting from a traditional approach, which is perhaps more proprietary and closed, to one that is much more open, that gives you, the organization, much more control over what you do, what content you provide, how you can adapt that content, make it personalized, bring that learning to be just in time, where and when you need it, and that it's proactive, it's demand-led, it's based on data that you collect, it's based on your specific needs as an organization, and that the more reactive, prescribed, just in case type of learning and training experience is one that's not as effective at delivering what you would need at the pace and in the context that you would require. So when you make those investments, too often, particularly with perhaps platforms in the past, or traditional older LMS platforms, you get a procurement type cycle, which too often is you make an investment, and then it stagnates. You don't get the best value out of that solution, and really that's not fit for purpose in the world that we now operate in. Technology needs to be something you can invest in, and that it can adapt with you as your business needs shift and change, and that you can take advantage of cumulative benefits as opposed to a stop-start, wasteful procurement type of cycle. So I'd strongly advise looking carefully at how your technology is enabling you to have control and support, and to be able to adapt when your business needs change, and they will change. Now, how is it changing? There are a number of key trends out there. I've picked on a couple of surveys that are fairly recent ones. This is a survey from Mercer. They surveyed 7,000 business and HR leaders around the world. And I picked out 3 findings here. The top one, aligning work with future value. What that means is that people need to be in roles where they are adding value to the organization. There are still many cases where organizations, perhaps because their business models to now have allowed jobs to be there in ways that perhaps they're not adding as much value as they could be. That is being challenged significantly. That efficiency, it needs to improve, and the effectiveness needs to improve. And those job roles, a number of those, as I've just said, may well be at risk of being automated even. They're changing quite radically. So that will create a reskilling challenge, and we all face that. But being able to identify roles and understand that they do will add value significantly to the organization is really critical. At the same time, we need to find and attract talent and hold on to talent. And to do that, we need to curate that work experience. They found that if you can get the tools and processes clear and easy to use, and the work simple and intuitive, then that will significantly retain talent in the future. And also allowing talent to be able to be involved in the redesign structure and the workflows of your organization are really quite critical as well. Slack, a tool that is in common use, as is MS Teams, also surveyed 17,000 knowledge workers and really indicated that engagement is critical to the success of an organization in being productive and effective. Aligned workers will operate with purpose, and they will take action. Unaligned workers will still sit perhaps in their silos and feel less empowered to take action, and that makes a significant difference in the ability for you to motivate and allocate people to do effective work. So I want to point to you to a report from Deloitte on capital trends. This was in 2017, but this has only just been reinforced, I think, and we're living it right now, is that any organizations that have been operating with legacy practices and haven't really looked carefully at how they're structured and are they fit for purpose for a digital first age, they're the ones that are probably suffering or are suffering the most, particularly in these unprecedented times that we are living through. If you want to be an organization that thrives in the future, then you need to be able to ensure that you can move fast and that you can adapt quickly. Now, this was some of the conclusions or recommendations made 3 years ago. We're really in that situation now. So the technology decisions that you make are really quite critical to supporting that shift and that change. And open technology, flexible technology, technology that's built to absorb change is really quite essential to a foundation, really, to enable you to move forward in that way. So open source technology is very prevalent across organizations around the world. This just indicates the reasons, the key benefits of taking that approach. It's well worth looking carefully at these benefits, because you can achieve lower cost of ownership, you can innovate faster, you do actually have better access to security, contrary to some perceptions and myths. The quality of the software typically is higher because there's more eyeballs, there's more support, more diverse support around that technology. It's enterprise ready, and you can integrate and customize readily into the ecosystems that you have available to you. So integration, flexibility, and control are really the three things I think that you should be focusing on when building out your learning infrastructures. Now, it's used in a wide range of organizations. These are just a few that we work with at Totara across the world: government, public sector, all types of sectors around the world. But what I'll do is I think pass you over to Alexander, who will give us an example that Androgogic have been working with.
Yeah, thanks, Lars. As Lars says, I'm going to talk about a worked example in the real world of really a broad flexible talent experience ecosystem, an educational technology platform, and a set of components that really drive that aligned workplace. I'm going to talk about a current state and a future state as well in the context of emerging LXP, which I think is something that should interest a lot of people today, certainly in the context of the conference and various threads that have been going on throughout today, including Josh Burson this morning. Specifically, I'm going to talk to an implementation we have in Australia in the largest state here, and it's the largest police force in Australia, the New South Wales Police Force, who've kindly allowed me to describe at a high level the implementation we started with them last year. We're now live with the first iteration of that, and we're moving on to a second. And then next year we'll be in a major upgrade, which I'll also talk to in terms of a development and a roadmap of that ecosystem and its evolution through time, which is, as I think Lars has alluded to, critically important that your procurement doesn't become stale, that you can have an ongoing development and an ongoing evolution of the systems as the organisation becomes more efficient at using those technologies. We've built the system around two key Totara components. One is Totara Learn, which is, in my opinion, an absolutely fabulous learning management system. And with nearly 700 learning management system implementations in my career, I would hope I know. It's really quite a complex organisation with over 20,000 sworn officers and civilian personnel with very different needs. We've got mandatory training for sworn officers and civilians. We've got a CPD tracking process for the civilian personnel who have to maintain a certain amount of professional development. We've got promotion systems. We've got very high ceremony concurrent testing around rank increment approaches. We've got skills update. We've got microlearn. So all the conventional things that you'll find in a learning management system. And so the requirements matrix was very, very extensive. And I'm delighted that the New South Wales Police chose us over, I think, 25 or 30 vendors. We've also got Totara Social, which is a social learning platform that augments the more formal and traditional approach of sort of managed and organised learning. And that we use for the ability to create sort of professional and social discourse that augments that traditional learning process. I'm going to come back to that a little bit later. Lars, if you take me to the next slide, please. An ecosystem of any kind really leverages good integrations, and one thing we've been able to do is create a detailed integration with, for example, not just a single sign-on, and we're using the Azure IDP for that and making the user experience really, really nice, both in mobile and in browser-based access. But also we have a very sophisticated data set of corporate metadata in the HRIS, and any sophisticated organisation will. One enormous advantage of Totara Learn, and by extension into social, is our ability to automate business processes such as curricular pathways, learning pathways, and be able to have a learner and management experience from an onboarding moment right through to offboarding, where all of the appropriate, mandatory, optional, and other, and even user experience options within dashboards and interfaces is automated based on that complex metadata stuff. So a sort of AI style rule set driving those processes, and also letting key administrators whose skills are really important within an organization to be able to set up and forget and then move on to the next interesting and important thing to do for the organization while the software does the work. And so we've got tools that have allowed us to pull those integrations. We pull it up through an enterprise service bus, which is common in enterprise architecture. Next slide, please, Lars. Content, we've also got content. An organisation like the police in New South Wales, and most organisations will need content, they create sophisticated content internally. If you think about some of their diverse needs, we've got over 140 commands, 80 or so doing standard policing needs, but 40 specialist commands, including things like forensics, safety rescue, bomb disposal, tactical responses, and so on. So the content spread is quite extraordinary, but we've brought in a learning content management system into the architecture. We use Alfresco for that, a specialist tool we've developed over about the last decade, and that allows us to do things like quality management, version control of courses and the constituent learning objects within them, but also workflow management and things like, for example, mapping of metadata against course content, so that if legislation changes or policy changes, we can trigger workflow that updates content that's been mapped against those sort of overarching compliance frameworks. We've also got, we haven't used it in the context of the police, but we also have federated content in the form of things like our content marketplace, Go On, 250,000 learning objects, which again just simplifies the learning and development process, where you can source and repurpose content on the fly from the various publishers in the world. Next slide, please, Lars. Reporting. Look, reporting is a linchpin component. We've got dashboards, and we use dashboards that allow users to have seamless user experience where they can see the things they have to do. The managers can see their teams and what they have to do. And as you go up the organization with hierarchical reporting structures, you can see business units and see at a high level what all of those people and where they're tracking. So we have compliance frameworks in place that have to be met and audits that have to be conducted. We can see well in advance where the organization's tracking and moving that way. And we can also take proactive nagware approaches to driving those processes. We also have integrations with things like standards-based frameworks. XAPI is obviously a good one for aggregating content across different contexts, and we integrate that stuff. Google Analytics and things like that for standard analytics components. Next slide, please, Lars. Right, and then the next one is mobile apps is a good one. In this case, we have a mobile app deployed for police. Our core components in the architecture are all responsive design, so they all work on mobile devices. So you might ask, why have we used an app? Well, we like a buttery smooth user experience in some contexts, but also with the app we get push notifications, which is increasingly important. And we've also enabled offline consumption of content. And that includes not just offline consumption of things like SCORM objects, video, and so on, but also the ability to do things like grading of face-to-face assessments, such as scoring of weapons training in a range in an offline context, and then sync that data back when the facilitator and the trainees return into a network connectivity. And so that's been compelling in this particular case. I think the point here is that we can extend a good ecosystem with those components. E-commerce is another example. We find cases where an e-commerce extension is a natural part of a broader ecosystem, and we build it around the core units. Lastly, I just want to talk about the evolution that we have in the core platform that we're using. Social's been a really interesting component of developing and extending beyond that standard training architecture. What we have now is a reimagining of social as Totara Engage, and that's a fully blown LXP. Some really interesting components. We can surface a folksonomatic curation of content, folksonomy, where we have learners who are not only consuming learning in the more formal tools like the LMS, and not only working in communities of discourse in the social learning environment, but also becoming content producers, creators, and negotiators within their micro communities, and bringing that content up and out of just out into places like Microsoft Teams, into Slack, and bringing that learning architecture up to the workplace. As an educational technologist, having started before we had LMSs and telling people that, yes, it's kind of like a website, to see us move into these kind of sophisticated learning tools and bringing them closer and closer to the workplace, and giving individual workers an ability not only for the organisation to align to their skills, but to align their skills and help the organisation is I think, profound. And I think what we've got here in the New South Wales Police is a very well-led organisation with excellent learning strategists, with an understanding of that roadmap and that journey. So next year, we'll take them to the next major version of the platform. We'll put out the shiny new Engage, and we'll bring in that folksonomatic component along with the social and discourse stuff. And that's
So
me.
thanks,
Back
Alex.
to you guys.
Thanks, Alex. Just a quick summary now as to where Engage is coming from. We have building out an integrated platform. It's based on the key motivators that I mentioned earlier in the session. So mastery, the urge to be better at what we do, building skills, autonomy, being self-directed, and having a sense of purpose that's beyond just ourselves. Daniel Pink wrote that book 10 years ago. It's very relevant now. I'd urge you to take a closer look at that. But essentially, at Totara, we're harnessing those or bringing together those three motivators into a single ecosystem that you can take much more control over. Essentially, bringing together learning management, performance management, and engagement, as Alexander alluded to just earlier. They act as three legs of a stool. If you miss one out, your organization is going to be unstable and is less likely to sort of survive and thrive in this world that we now live in. So we can bring together all of these three entities and make them much more coordinated and synchronized in our organizations than perhaps we do currently. Typically, they're managed separately and differently. This slide summarizes in essence where the Totara talent experience platform is heading. We're very excited about launching that this year to improve in the effectiveness of learning, employee engagement, and to offer very flexible performance management opportunities. And we can provide you with more information about that as needed. We have some great resources for you to download. There's a pop-up which I think will appear right shortly, and you can join the Totara community. It's a free community of learning professionals. 7,000 are in there right now, and they can they operate on an open and collaborative basis. So there's plenty to learn from each other there. So I'd urge you to come and join us in the Totara.community area.
Right. All right. Thank you, Alexander.
Thank you very much.
And Lars. As Lars mentioned, we have a very special offer for the attendees today before we proceed to the Q&A session. There you go. Don't miss out on that great offer. All right. All right. Thanks for coming back again, Alexander and Lars. Maybe we can take a question from the floor. All right. What do you think is a good onboarding app for organizations to use?
A good onboarding application.
Yes, for organizations to use.
I can take it if you want, Lars.
Yes, please do, Alexander.
Yeah, look, I mentioned before automation and automating learning pathways. We've developed a custom onboarding component for Totara, but generally we don't need it, because if you integrate the HR system elegantly, and it's straightforward, as people are created in the corporate systems, they can have their metadata thrown through to the LMS. The LMS then has the ability to go mandatory training, optional training, engagement with their manager, engagement with their teams. and that produces a pathway of onboarding. So it's relatively straightforward to do, and you don't necessarily need a custom application for it. We've written one to do things like police checks and working with children checks and so on, but frankly, we almost never use it because the business process of engagement, as I said, from onboarding through to offboarding is configurable. And a good LMS should be able to do it using automation around the HR metadata. Hopefully that answers the question. Back to you, Lars. And Sean?
Any other questions? Hi, Sean.
There's a good one on folksonomy that would be interesting.
Yeah.
Yes, hi, sorry. Do you want to answer that, Alexander?
Yeah, look, folksonomy, and so the ability of a folk of people to converge. It's usually used around meta tagging and tag clouds and things like that. And I think I might have made up a word by saying folksonomatic. So apologies to all the linguists amongst us. But there's a gap, so that's fair. One thing that we've been experimenting with in Totara Engage has been the ability for individual users to curate content, not only from other content on the system, but create their own content. And for that content to have a social engagement with people following it and liking it, following the individual, following the content. And then we use that to basically empower the standing of the content and the standing of the user. So if you're someone in your organization who's an expert and is interested in promoting their area of expertise, we can create groups and realms and content and people who have this kudos or this standing. And that empowers people to become part of the organizational learning that transcends the ability of learning and development to create the traditional courses of next, or whatever. Now, that's a fascinating thing. And then if we can surface that, as we've been doing, up in the workplace tools like Microsoft Teams and Slack, and bring that content right to the fingertips, and also bring the ability for those individuals who are putting that work in, that effort in, to shine. We give them an updraft of vocational opportunity. And that's how you nurture a social community, and that's how you nurture a social community of learning. You can't do it top down. You have to encourage it and nurture it and let it come from bottom up. How do you create an updraft? Vocational and personal interest for individuals to shine, have the respect of their peers, and be promoted and make higher salaries. There are fantastic updraft drivers in a social community of learning. We've experimented with this extensively over the last 5, 6, 7 years with social. We've seen it work fantastically in Australia in different places. And one of the key drivers for me in my next couple of years is going to be to see us transform organisations, and the police are a great example, by drawing not just on their 400, 500 trainers, but on their 25,000 staff and the ones who want to play and put in that effort. So that's what I meant by folksonomy. Lars, have you got any additions with that?
Only in that, having a very flexible, collaborative, open collaborative platform on which you can curate and open up individuals to expose, if you like, and share their expertise, which may not always be visible across the organization, is a really powerful way to find talent, to allow talent to express themselves, and also to really tap into that motivator, which is, feeling like you're contributing to the wider goals of the organization. So yeah, I think that's a fantastic method and approach to take forward.
Right. Thank you, Lars. That's Lars Hyland, Chief Learning Officer of Totara, and Alexander Roche, Principal Education Technologies and CEO of Androgogic. Unfortunately, we run out of time, but before we go, we're going to make the PDF of today's session available for you for download, all right?
Yep, please do.
Thanks, everyone.
So we hope you have
for your
enjoyed today's webinar session, and we hope to see you in the next one happening at 3:15 p.m. So I will be shortly ending the webinar, and it will take 10 seconds to redirect you to the schedule page. Okay? So alternatively, you can go directly to hrtechfestconnect.com/live to access the link to the next webinar. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Alexander. Thank you, Lars, and we hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
everyone. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.